Hello all, and welcome to Behind the Seams with your narrator Jay from the Drunks on the Pond podcast. If you're new here, welcome. The series is about bringing players and their stories back to the light and giving them another chance to be heard. In this episode, we'll be deep diving into the player who was built like a beer keg and was not unfamiliar with its contents. A man who still holds the NL record for RBIs. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my honor to introduce you to Lewis Robert Wilson, or better known as Hack Wilson. Before we get into it, if you enjoy these stories and would like more, then please make sure to subscribe, leave a thumbs up, and comment who you would love to hear about. Baseball has had plenty of storied careers, and I'm going to do my absolute best to keep these coming. Now let's get into it. Lewis Wilson was born April 26, 1900 in Elwood City, Pennsylvania, to a mother named Jenny Kahn and a father named Robert Wilson. Jenny was an unemployed drifter from Philadelphia, and his father was a steel worker. Unfortunately for Hack, his parents were never married and both had heavy drinking problems. In 1907, his mother sadly passed away from appendicitis at the age of just 24 years old. After his mother's passing, his father sadly abandoned Hack to be raised by a woman only known as Grandma Wardman that just happened to own a boarding house. Her son Connie looked after him and was even his introduction into the game of baseball. Life seemed to be moving in a positive direction for young Lewis after a pretty tumultuous early life, until one day, without warning, his father had returned and moved himself and Hack down to Chester, Pennsylvania, and then to Eddystone. Side note, I used to live 15 minutes at most from Chester and probably just about 10 minutes from Eddystone. So it's kind of crazy. And both of these places were just south of the city of Philadelphia, for those who didn't know, obviously. When he was just 16 years old, Lewis left school and decided to go into work, which wasn't terribly uncommon for kids who grew up with rough childhoods. He worked for 2 years, 12 hours a day, and only earned himself about $4 a day working at Eddystone Print Works. $4 a day. Definitely can't live off that now. While working there, Lewis was to have said, "I had carried 1,000,000 pounds of lead and was getting to become a big, husky lad." This was an understatement. Remember when I said he was built like a beer keg in the opening? Well, Lewis stood at 5 foot 6 inches, a giant torso, short, stubby legs, and weighed anywhere between 100 and 230 pounds. He had 16-inch biceps, an 18-inch neck, small hands, and his shoe size was believed to be only about a 5.5 men's. It's a little crazy. To understand just how small his hands were, they had to sand down his bat handles just so he could get a good grip. Obviously, Lewis is known for his distinct physical features, and some considered he may have signs of fetal alcohol syndrome, which was a fair assumption considering both of his parents were heavy drinkers. We can speculate and go off of what we know now, but obviously at this point we will never have a formal diagnosis. We do know that he has a significant family history of alcohol abuse, and that most likely contributed to his own issues with alcohol and his own alcohol abuse. Wilson had spent a lot of his spare time outside of work playing baseball in sandlots, amateur level, and semi-pro, working as a catcher, and in 1921, Wilson moved down to Martinsburg, West Virginia to continue his baseball career. He landed with the Martinsburg Blue Sox of the Class D Blue Ridge League. Now, to clear up probably the biggest question, why was his nickname Hack? Well, that's a great question, and unfortunately one with many answers. One being that he resembled George Hackenschmidt, a strongman amateur wrestler. Another being that he looked like Hack Miller, who just happened to play for the Chicago Cubs. And the other one being from John McGraw, who said he looked like a hack, which was slang for a taxi in those days. So I guess you can just pick your favorite and there you go. Wilson was looking for a fresh start, but got a different surprise altogether when in his first game he broke his leg sliding into home base. It's a tough break. But don't worry, something great was just about to happen. Hack met a local woman, an office clerk named Virginia Riddleberger. They married the following year, and while being careful with his leg, they switched him to the outfield to keep the strain off his leg catching behind the plate. In 114 games, Wilson showed a lot of potential that caught the eyes of the Portsmouth Truckers of the Class B Virginia League, and shortly after the start of the 1923 season, they bought him for $500. By the end of the season, Portsmouth was in trade talks with the New York Giants and offered Hack as a tag-along for a pitcher that John McGraw, manager of the Giants, had a keen eye for. They agreed, and on September 29, 23, Hack made his debut in the major leagues. Although he showed potential with his bat and his speed in the outfield, John McGraw was not really impressed. Hack played the bench in 1924, and even though he produced, he couldn't find a starting job until mid-June. Just when he started to get himself going, he unfortunately sprained his ankle and missed a week, leading him to taping his ankles for every game. It didn't help, and unfortunately he hurt the ankle again in early September, but managed to finish out the season and even played in the World Series that year in a losing effort against the Washington Senators. Side note, this was the only championship the Washington Senators would actually win. Now, the reason I'm telling you this is because I am a big Walter Johnson fan, and I'll speak kindly of him when given the chance. Shout out Walter Johnson, also known as the Big Train. Hack would finish the season with a .295 batting average, 10 home runs, 57 RBIs. Solid production for a guy that spent half the year on the bench. In 1925, Wilson couldn't replicate his 1924 success, and despite hitting the longest home run in Ebbets Field history, he still struggled to hit the curveball. Reminds me of a certain movie with another player who had trouble with curveballs. Wilson had hit a slump, and McGraw just couldn't take it anymore. He sent Wilson down to the Giants minor league affiliate Toledo in early August. Although he felt humiliated, what he didn't know was this was just about the beginning of his Hall of Fame career. Still unsure in how it happened, the Giants left Hack Wilson unprotected in the minor leagues, and he was immediately scooped up by the Chicago Cubs for just $5,000 on the waiver wire. Now, the reason I'm laughing is because I know how the story goes, and it's more me laughing at the fact that a Hall of Fame player was left unprotected. Now, what I mean by unprotected is that in the minor leagues, you can protect certain players by adding them to the 40-man roster, but those players who aren't protected, they can get scooped up by other teams. A lot of great players have been off the waiver wire. Like, first one that comes to mind is Shane Victorino, who won a World Series with the Phillies, helped get us there. Just an overall great career. Hall of Fame worthy? No. But a great career nonetheless. Hack Wilson, on the other hand, was a completely different story. But let's get back to it. Giants outfielder Ross Youngs went on to say, "They let go the best outfielder I ever played alongside, and they're going to regret it." During the World Series that year, Hack's wife gave birth to their first son, Robert. The move to Chicago was just the move that Hack needed, and also the move that just might have cursed him. New Cubs manager Joe McCarthy and Wilson had good chemistry to where Joe would leave him alone to do his thing as long as Hack didn't let it affect his game. And I guess it's a fair trade. Hack once told Gabby Hartnett that he never played a game drunk, but he has played many hungover. Drinking wasn't the only thing Hack got himself into, unfortunately. He was arrested trying to climb out of a speakeasy window and somehow only fined $1. 4 quarters, 10 dimes, 20 nickels. $1. He fought a foul-mouthed heckler at a game and somehow survived a retaliatory lawsuit. He beat the out of Reds pitcher Ray Culp for continuously calling him a bastard, which was a sensitive slur, especially for Hack at the time. And after the game, he saw Reds pitcher Pete Donahue at a railroad platform and then proceeded to knock him out. This time, he called himself a 3-day suspension and a $100 fine. A little more than $1. What makes it especially crazy is that William Wrigley, owner of the Cubs, was highly against alcohol consumption and Wilson's partying ways. Joe McCarthy was able to manage around these issues for around 5 years, shielding Wilson from Wrigley. McCarthy could be strict and stern with players, but never with Hack, and Hack repaid him by having some of his greatest years anyone has ever seen. In his 1926 season, Wilson had a .321 average, 21 home runs, 109 RBIs, and would finish 5th in MVP votings. In 1927, he had around the same amount of success, hitting .318, 30 home runs, and 129 RBIs, leading the National League in home runs for the second consecutive season. So when I tell you his career was just getting started, it was just getting started. Remember all those fights that he got into? All of them, 1928. You would think with all of that happening, Wilson would have had like a steep decline, right? Nope. He hit .313, 31 home runs, and drove in 120 RBIs. So, I mean, for a guy who was battling others and demons, he certainly didn't let it affect his ball playing. In 1928, he once again led the NL in home runs, making it 3 consecutive years. Something that we see every so often, but like for a guy who was making headlines outside of baseball, I mean, this was kind of crazy. I mean, especially during a time where Babe Ruth was still playing. Now, Babe Ruth was obviously in the American League, so it's not like him and Hack were going up against each other, but I mean, this was still baseball. Like, it's still baseball. 1929 was more of the same for Wilson. He signed a contract to box Art Shires of the Chicago White Sox until Bill Veeck Sr. asked Wilson's wife to dissuade him. It worked. In 1929, he finished with a .345 average, 39 home runs, and 159 RBIs, helping get the Cubs to the World Series to face Connie Mack's Philadelphia Athletics powerhouse. Though Wilson hit .471 in the series, he had 2 costly errors that lost them the whole thing. According to teammate Kiki Kyler, Wilson was inconsolable, brushing through the crowd after the game with tears in his eyes. A terrible nightmare to relive for anybody. Luckily, the baseball gods gave Hack a break, and he had the greatest season of his entire career in 1930. By the middle of July, Wilson had already had 82 RBIs. Middle of July, and he's already close to 100 runs driven in. In August, he hit 13 home runs and added another 53 RBI. In 1 month, 53 RBIs. It's just absolutely unheard of. By September 17th, he had reached 174 RBIs, breaking Lou Gehrig's record set just 3 years earlier. I want to take a moment to talk about this because could you imagine Lou Gehrig driving in 173 runs? Something that I don't think has been done in God knows how long. Like, this is a number that is so insane. Lou Gehrig must have just been like, there's no way no one breaks this. And then just 3 years later, this 5'6" walking beer keg hits 174. That is absolutely mental, but it gets better. He finished the season with 190 RBIs, which is still the National League record, 56 home runs, which was also the National League record at the time. He hit .356 and slugged an impressive .723. Just purely mental that this came from a guy like Hack Wilson. The Baseball Writers Association of America named him the most useful player. I'll answer your question right now. It's the MVP award before the MVP award because the one we have today wasn't introduced until 1931. Hack Wilson had his greatest year in 1930, and then the MVP award was introduced in 1931. You know, some guys just get all the breaks. While Hack was enjoying his 1930 success, he had no idea the unfortunate downfall that was coming his way. While Hack had celebrated his 1930 season, Joe McCarthy decided it was time to move on to go manage the New York Yankees. When spring training rolled around that year, Hack arrived 20 pounds overweight and was under heavy scrutiny with new manager Roger Hornsby, who was more stern and like a military leader, unlike Joe McCarthy. Roger Hornsby was pure baseball. Like, we're talking about the guy that put off his own mother's funeral because it fell between the World Series. Then Roger Hornsby went on to win the World Series, and then they had his mom's funeral. The guy was one of one, man. This is crazy, man. Hornsby set curfews, set weight goals, and wanted his team to play more self-disciplined baseball. It's just everything that Hack wasn't. This led to the two men being at odds for majority of that season. Hack had a lousy spring training that unfortunately continued into the season, leading Hornsby to bench him for his performance. He did hit his 200th home run at Ebbets Field that season, and he was only the fourth player to ever hit that mark, but it just couldn't save the season. He got in a shouting match with umpire Beans Reardon on August 24th, refused to leave the field, and had to be dragged away by his own teammates. On September 6th, he was suspended for the rest of the season without pay for a confrontation that happened during a trip to Cincinnati. He finished the season hitting .261, 13 home runs, and 61 RBIs. It was almost his entire August stat line from his great 1930 season. It was becoming abundantly clear that Hack was no longer the same player, and Wrigley just wanted to do away with the troubled star at this point. In December of 1931, Wrigley sent him to St. Louis, leaving Hack in shock, but that wasn't even the biggest shock to come. Branch Rickey, general manager of the Cardinals, wanted Hack to take a pay cut of 77%. Wilson said no chance he plays for that under any conditions, and after constant back and forth, Branch made the decision to trade him to the Brooklyn Dodgers just for a minor league pitcher. And he threw in some cash too, but it's still nuts. Hack signed for $16,500, which was still a pay cut, and repaid the Dodgers with a solid stat line of hitting .297, 23 home runs, and 123 RBIs in 1932. So, I mean, a little bit of a bounce back for him.
I'm very glad to be with the Dodgers, and I understand they're going to leave him about the last of this month, and I'll be right with them. When I get down south, I'm certainly going to work hard for that comeback, and I expect to have a great year.
In 1933, Hack was beginning to show the effects of all the drinking. He got even bigger, weighing around 230 pounds, and was beginning to look even older than he was. His performance on the field began to slip as well, as he was no longer the power hitter we knew back in 1930. He finished the 1933 season with a .267 batting average, just 9 home runs, and 54 RBIs. Nobody ever wants to admit it's over, but the signs were obviously there for Hack. He even held out when Brooklyn offered him a contract of $11,000. Luckily, the contract was still there when Hack decided to finally sign. Unfortunately, Hack couldn't get it going as Brooklyn ultimately decided to release him on August 9th. Luckily, after being released, he was immediately claimed by the Philadelphia Phillies. Why wouldn't the team that has only won 2 championships in over 140 years of existing claim a player past their prime? It just makes too much sense. Unfortunately, it wouldn't be enough for him to keep a job, as he went 2 for 20 at the plate and was once again released just a month later. He decided to join Albany in the International League in 1935, but after just playing 59 games, decided that it was over. Hack Wilson officially retired. I really wish I could say life got better for Hack after baseball, but it didn't. He returned to Martinsburg, where he opened up a recreation and pool hall and began spending a lot of time with his drinking buddies while drifting further from his wife and son. Hack was a terrible businessman and was eventually just bought out by his partner. As if it couldn't get worse, his wife had finally had enough, and she filed for divorce, claiming that she and their son had been abandoned by Hack, and he had been seeing another woman on the side. Unfortunately, she was correct, as Hack was seeing a woman who worked at the pool hall, and, sometime down the road they would just end up getting married. Hack would end up working a lot of odd jobs, and eventually the city of Baltimore gave him the job of attendant at a public swimming pool. Just a long fall from grace. Toward the end of his life, Wilson was finally given the chance to speak on a CBS radio show called We the People, where he admitted to drinking his life away, and he spoke eloquently, telling children all over to be considerate to others and never be too big to take advice. A week after the interview, Wilson fell at his apartment and was rushed to the Baltimore City Hospital. A couple days later, on November 23rd, 1948, Hack Wilson had passed away. He was 48 years young. Because of Wilson's past, his body laid at the mortuary for 3 days as his son refused to accept responsibility for it. His drinking buddies filled a hat to help pay for a funeral service and have enough for a gravestone. The National League sent $350 to help. Though he was scheduled to be interred in Baltimore, he was buried in a donated plot in Martinsburg. 10 months later, Joe McCarthy organized a second funeral service attended by former teammates for Wilson, unveiling a new granite tombstone with the writing, "One of baseball's immortals, Lewis R. Wilson, 1,461 hits, 244 home runs, 1,063 RBIs, and a lifetime batting average of .307. Four-time National League home run leader, two-time National League RBI leader, MLB record for 191 RBIs in a single season, and a member of the Chicago Cubs Hall of Fame." Hack Wilson was inducted into the Cooperstown Hall of Fame class of 1979. Thank you very much for tuning into this episode of Behind the Seams on Hack Wilson. A man given a tough beginning, but didn't let it stop him from becoming one of the most dangerous hitters of the 1920s, we'll say the 30s. It's a genuine shame he didn't have a chance to talk about regrets until the end of his life, but at least he admitted his own mistakes and made sure to tell people to learn from him and do better. My name is Jay, and I will see you all in the next episode. Cheers.